Today's guest is someone whose work doesn't just live in a classroom. It lives in a community, in a culture, and on the front lines of real justice. Aeyanna Yett is a scholar, a social worker, and a disruptor in the best possible way. She's a PhD student at Wayne State University School of Social Work, where she's already shaken tables as a coordinator at the Center for Social Work Research. But her work goes way beyond the academic grind. Aeyanna has spent her career intervening in the lives of Black women who have experienced sexual assault, not just through services, but through shifting policy, by being there for people, informing institutions, and pushing for real structural change. Her focus? Creating an anti-rape culture grounded in Black feminist and intersectional frameworks. Her mission? Addressing the full, messy, powerful truth of Black women's socialization, whether that be sexually or professionally. She's not just writing papers. She's shaping narratives. She's training researchers. She's leading focus groups and holding systems accountable. She's doing it all while living life as an activist. So let's give a warm welcome to Miss Aeyanna Yett.
Wow, you shot me with that one.
I had to do my research, bro. I gotta know who I'm talking to. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm
blushing. I'm like, wait a minute. I was just saying thank you so much for that beautiful intro. I'm blushing. I'm so grateful for you bringing me to this space and for having me and thinking of me to have this conversation. I am honored, to say the very least.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I'm so happy to have you here. There's a lot of things I would love to talk to you about, but today we have to focus on this particular topic, okay? So that is microaggressions. So with that being the case, you've been a Black woman. I thought that my experience within this realm would be limited because I only have lived like that as a man. So this amazing Black woman here will explain to us, you know, to some degree, what it's like to go through microaggressions as a woman. So what do you wish people knew or understood about microaggressions?
Yeah, so I'll start off with this. We, as non-white people in general, will experience a microaggression in our lifetime. So even with you being a man, because you're a Black man, there is a high likelihood that you will experience a microaggression.
Oh yeah, all the
And
time.
what microaggressions essentially are, they're like, well, they're described as like a set of like words, messages, behaviors that are rooted in, of course, racism, but rooted also in stereotyping and discrimination bias. And all of that objectification of a person's lived experience based off of how they are seen in society, whether that be how they're racialized, how they are feminized, if they live within a feminized body, masculinized, if they live in a masculine body, etc. So it's essentially just a set of messages, behaviors that work against how someone truly lives based off of how someone perceives them.
Would you say initially that microaggressions could be damaging?
Very, very. And forgive me for not having the beautiful scholar that came up with the word microaggression. He coined the term. And because in addition to all the work that I do in academia, outside of academia, I hold support space in a community through the organization, the Sasha Center, which essentially stands for Sexual Assault Services for Holistic Healing and Awareness. And in that center, I am a trainer. So I train on microaggressions. I train on how this affects how we are able to particularly hold space for Black women as they're seeking help after surviving an assault or experiencing an assault, but also what they experience as they're navigating the service system or I would say the service environment. So like going to the police or going to get a rape kit or different things like that. And so with that, and I bring up the Sasha Center because in that training that I hold, we directly call microaggressions macro assaults because that's essentially what they are. They are.
Wait, I'm sorry. One more time, you said microaggressions are macro assaults?
are macro assaults. And it's so important, especially for Black people, that we rename it as such, because many of those microaggressions that we experience, now that I'm changing the word to macro assaults, are all based on our historical lived experiences with ancestral enslavement. So for instance, like microaggressions that even I've experienced is, oh, your hair looks so. When I was a young researcher, I was working in a research lab, and I had afro, big old afro with space buns. Steven knew me at that time and I had my fro.
Yeah.
And um, this person said, "Oh, I love your hair. I did that with my daughter's hair a couple of weeks ago. So you infantilized me."
Wait. So what?
And
What does she look like?
and this is where things get a little funky, right? When I say we're Black people, microaggressions are usually macro assaults. Is because, and when I say that, it's because we deal with a society that, yes, we understand race. Okay, so just to give a basis of racism is a system of advantage based on race, right? um there is a such thing as anti-Black racism. Anti-Black racism is a system of advantage based on non-Blackness. I say that because this was an Asian woman who told me that my hair was cute, and she did it to her daughter's hair. Her daughter being a half white, half Asian
Does she
daughter,
have
a
pictures?
child. Did she show me pictures?
Yeah.
No, she ain't show me no pictures. She was trying to be slick. She did not show me no pictures. She was trying to be slick and trying to hit me in a way that infantilized me, that took my creativity and changed it to be childlike, which honestly is not a bad idea. Children live wonderful lives. But, as a grown woman, you're telling me that you did that to your child's hair. Microaggression, macro assault.
Mm-hmm. That makes complete sense. I love the way you reframe that as macro. You're giving a seriousness that needs to be given to it. And that leads right into my next question, which is, what do you think the effects of it are long term? If it's not a micro thing, if it's a macro thing, and you keep, we framed it as micro because it happens so often and we get cut and chipped all the time. But reframing it as macro, how do you think it affects people over the long term?
Yeah, so there's a great video on YouTube. I think it's by a YouTube channel called Fusion TV, and it equates microaggressions to mosquito bites. And what I love about it is that at the end of the video is a Black woman who's experiencing. She's a character like a drawn cartoon character, but she's experiencing so many mosquito bites that at the end she's just blown up, full of little bug bites, right? And I think that's a perfect visual analogy to how microaggressions are macro assaults, and how the long term effects are startling, they're damaging, to the point of dismantling the psyche. And what I mean by that is there's a term we use in psychology called learned helplessness. And essentially, what that is when you're seeking help so much and the door keeps being slammed on you, or you're unable to access the resources that you need to live a whole and healthy life, you learn how to accommodate, or you adopt a mindset to accommodate not having access to these resources. And in the more sad grief side, it's called learned helplessness, meaning that you kind of adopt like an Eeyore mentality of like, woe is me, I'm so woe, I can't do anything, that kind of thing. So I bring that up because macro assaults can sadly contribute to that mentality. Macro assaults can contribute to a host of psychological um, outcomes and impacts like depression, anxiety. Um, And really just because depression and anxiety are symptoms of being outside of yourself. That's how I understand psychological disorders of being disconnected from who you are authentically. And
Mm-hmm.
microaggressions slash macro assaults literally disconnect you from who you are authentically to how the world perceives you.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, um,
Okay, so going more into the psychological aspect of it, like the intricacies of navigating on a daily basis, right? Can you speak to, the processes that happens in your mind when you have to constantly decode people's intent?
yeah, no, it's a debilitating cost. You mentioned psychological, it's also an emotional cost. It's a cost to our intuition.
Mm.
It's even a cost to our physical being, how we choose to show up with our bodies in specific ways. Um, so
Wait, can
going
I
into,
add a question?
yeah.
Because this is actually a part of a series called America is Racism, right? The first episode was an
Mhm.
overview. This is number 2 on microaggressions. And so we can go into the whole anti-blackness thing. But when we have to when you spoke before, your last question, I'm sorry, I'm jumping back because it was so interesting. But you said so much I had to think about it. So when we experience microaggressions and we feel a way and it dehumanizes us, and you expressed previously how you wanted to, do your thing and be successful in a sense to kind of prove this lady wrong, right? Or to like
Mhm.
kind of knock off that label or stereotype or energy or whatever is being applied to you. How do you think that affects the way we operate within American society with how we relate to non-black people, with how we perform around non-black people?
All right. So we going into America's racism, right? When Christopher Columbus sailed that ocean blue in 1492,
Right? Yeah.
he brought.
He did
That's
something that
when it
year. That
all
shit.
started.
Yeah, he did something for sure.
all jokes aside,
He was a great explorer, though. Like technically,
you
I'm
know,
just.
I'm not going to take away the success of navigation, especially in a I mean, we always had technologies, right? The ancient Egyptians, had specific technologies to be able to create great pyramids and great sphinx. All ancient societies had technologies. So we're going to just say pre-digital technology to be
Okay.
able to navigate oceans in such a way. I don't take that away from him. However, the purpose and the intention to why he was sent to navigate those oceans was for capitalistic gain. And so when we think about America as racism, think really America is was created for capitalistic gain, and racism was the tool in which to create that capitalism. And when we think capitalism, yeah, we're thinking about money, right? Because when you think about the history of Europe, very rigid, poor, hard place to live, they're looking to make a better life. They see all these black people living comfortably in Africa. They see Asians living comfortably in Asia, across Asia. And they're like, we want that. We need that. We got to have it. And then Christopher Columbus sells Ocean Blue, essentially. And it's so important to understand that because if we don't have a good grasp of how capitalism exploited how capitalism not only I would say changed the dynamic of history and how we socially related with one another. It also introduced the exploitation of people's bodies for the creation of money, of a dominating hierarchy of who gets to be rich versus who gets to be poor. We in the brown and black sides of the world did not have a feudalistic lifestyle like Europe and Europeans
Mm-hmm.
did in their history. So they kind of already came from this place of I need to get on top, I need to be on top. we were more so community oriented, collectively focused. If one of us is down, all of us is down. If one of us is up, all of us are up. And so when Europe and specific monarchies like Spain, like Portugal, England, when they all decided to get up even more, they went into knowing the cultures. It's so important also to mention there was knowledge of our cultures. We were all connected through the Berber trade routes and all that jazz. Like, we've all known each other. So they knew how collectivist and community oriented our ancestors were. And they used that to exploit our labor in such a way that history has not seen a type of enslavement and slavery practice as what was done to Africa. With that said, racism is the tool of capitalism. It's what keeps that domination hierarchy going, where we have white supremacy, and the characteristics of white supremacy. Some of those things look like time, some worship of the written word.
Look like time?
We'll
save that. We'll save that. Continue. Continue.
But I love, there was a group of and I don't want to miscite. I believe they are from Harvard. If anyone's interested in looking up the characteristics of white supremacy, please do, and have a deep dive analysis of how it shows up in your life. Mine, it definitely showed up as perfectionism. Whole wild introspective moment in there. But anyways, back to racism, right? And how anti-Blackness plays a role. Racism essentially was a tool to, bring on capitalism enacted through chattel slavery. And when it was created, it was a recognition that we had to distinguish ourselves from who we are enslaving, which are Black people. So in comes anti-Blackness, anti-Black mentalities, anti-Black messaging, ideologies, actions, behaviors, etc., all based on the dehumanizing and devaluing of Black people. And when we say Black, that's when we also racialize. So we instead of honoring ethnic and tribal differences, we group Black people all as a monolith and then racialize them to keep that Black class, Black status. So that's essentially what anti-Blackness is, and how that was the contributor, that's the contributing key factor to racism, what that is. And I could go all into it, how it is shown up systemically. But it's very important to know, as Beverly Daniels Tatum says and describes it, racism is a system of advantage based on race. And so when you think about microaggressions and macro assaults, they are nothing but itty bitty interpersonal tools to keep the system of capitalism in check, to keep the system of racism in check. So when you're thinking about, like, why are Black people experiencing, like, where, like, these ceilings where they're unable to move higher? Well, if in policy, in law, in all these ways of systemically being, you are reduced to slave status, who then are you to try to make it out of said slave status? This is the same mentality from like literally 1648, 1762, all the 400, 500, 600 years. This mentality, this idea has been there. And America can only succeed capitalistically with having a class, a subjugated class. That subjugated class looks Black, it looks poor, it looks queer, it looks like all the things that do not worship cis heteronormative whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you do not, if you are not within cis heteronormative whiteness and maleness, that little combination right there, you are then othered. And how do we check the other people and keep them in the other status? We do things interpersonally with them, in addition to systemically. But the interpersonal tool to keep them in check are those microaggressions and macro assaults. And so when you think about what that does, over a long period of time, having exposure, it's like having, like, for instance, long-term exposure to lead. We know as Michiganders with the Flint water crisis, and dare I say Detroit led water crisis, but we ain't gonna go there. I know. Listen.
The city looked pretty. It looked good right now. I'm just look.
It looked good right now, but for whom?
This is gentrification. That's another part, but so many factors to this.
But yeah, so back to the analogy, right? We know as Michiganders what's going on in Flint. What happens to long exposures to lead? There's issues generationally. Long exposure to lead changes your DNA and how it structures and how it forms, and it shortens telomeres and elongates other parts that cause shorter lifespans. It causes deformations of brain development. And so think about that. We know the physical effects of what access or exposure, longer term exposure to lead is. What about those interpersonal things? Like, we're learning that long-term exposure to stress in Black women in working environments can cause, or it correlates with, the development of autoimmune disorders. So we
Oh
know that
wow.
stress. So we know that long-term exposure to stress in a workplace can break your body down to create autoimmune disorders. What can long-term exposure to macro assaults and microaggressions do to our brain, to how we think of ourselves and see the world around us, how we care for our bodies, how we care for our spirits and our souls? It's debilitating. At the very end of the day, it's debilitating. If you are told all the time, thinking about, for instance, why the Crown Act was so important. Black women were forced to straighten our hair or cover our hair because, well, long story short,
Wow.
yes. So hear me out, right? So
Wow.
Black women were
Jesus
forced to
Christ.
cover our hair in enslavement because we were stealing the white women's husbands. We weren't stealing nobody's husband. Massa was raping us, right? So, and I'm sorry, content warning for sexual violence. I've been discussing. This is just so common for me to discuss. I keep forgetting to do content
It's
warnings.
fine. It's fine. It's for adults.
For adults. But if this
But
is
the kids
triggering
want to
for
watch.
you, I have some resources. Black women were forced to cover their hair because they were blamed that the curls were wilding white men out, right? That then turned into when you were working around them to straighten your hair. So then there was a distinction between women who worked in the field. They had their head covered, but to work within proper society, what white supremacy deems to be proper, what white supremacy conceptualizes or imagines to be proper, Black women took the head covering off and had to straighten their hair. And so then and these are all policies, rules, and regulations then enacted interpersonally, right? And so think about through years, Black women working as maids, because, and I'm not going to get into gender wars and stuff. Black women always been working. We ain't never stopped working. So going from enslavement to
Yeah, but
being
to
able to
women working
work.
in general. Yeah, right?
Yeah,
But that's what you're alluding
yeah.
to, like the
Well,
time where
Black
women
women
started.
working.
Wait, yeah, continue. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm referring specifically to Black women working. We've always worked since the conception of this country, the conception of this economy. And so when Black women went from the fields and Massa House to working in Mrs. House, for pennies to the dollar, the hair still had to be straight. Any
Mm-hmm.
curl, any is a no-no. And that mentality still carried on into to what was considered professional, because we went from what was proper back before the abolition of slavery to what is professional post abolition and in that Reconstruction era, because we had to reframe some of the words that we were using to adapt to this new understanding of what our society was going to be. And so
Mm-hmm.
with that professional look of straight hair has carried on to even now. Where we have organizations, thanks to this new administration, rolling back. They're bowing down to the Crown Act. The Crown Act is stuck, so it cannot be passed federally. Is only passed by, I believe we're at 13 states. I'm grateful that Michigan is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we had to have a law or an act to reverse a law related to the state of our very hair is outstanding. And think about how that has affected Black women's relationship with their hair, when Black people have always had a spiritual relationship and understanding with our hair. And of course, this was known because our oppressor knew us. They knew exactly what it took to enslave us.
Mm-hmm.
Word to Dr. Joy DeGruy, post
Syndrome.
traumatic slave syndrome. There's things that we've had to keep within our psyche that were protective measures that now are harming us. They're now harming us. So considering, back to the hair analogy, we are learning that perms now are causing reproductive cancer and reproductive harm. Well, how long have Black women been perming their hair? And we're the highest population to experience cervical cancer, endometriosis, um, just go down the list of reproductive cancers and reproductive harms. We are among the highest population to experience it. And even down to, I'm not coming for nobody's wigs. Let me just put that disclaimer out there. But even how we got to wig culture, a lot of it can be traced back to that proper professionalistic white ideology and imagining from and based from white supremacy. And so thinking about how, for instance, without going to back to that finding where Black women in the workplace who have long exposures of stress are coming up with autoimmune disorders. Say part of your stress is because of your hair. Even when I was a kid, when I started attending predominantly white schools, my math teacher told me I should straighten my hair. That harmed me. I went home to my parents. My parents never put nothing to my head, and I said I would like to see my hair straightened one time. My mom said okay. She let me straighten my hair. The next day, the teacher said, "Oh, I really like your hair that way." That is a microaggression or macro
Yeah, that
slash
just
macro assault. On the flip side, we usually kind of think of it as like, oh, there's these harmful things, but sometimes they can sound like compliments, but it's a compliment masked, disguised as a harmful message. And so you're learning all these ways of how not to be your authentic self through these interpersonal messages that are given to you. And it's keeping you in check from showing up as your authentic self. And the longer you stay outside of being who you are authentically are, the longer it takes for you to be able to return back to your body, return back to your mind. You have psychological effects, with depression, anxiety, um, body image disorder. That's a huge one that we don't really talk about, how microaggressions and macro assaults affect the ways in which we see our bodies and how we engage and interact with our bodies. It has a whole host of different effects. So I'm sorry I took you from Christopher Columbus to now. with
This
how,
is
racism as a tool to the system of capitalism has how that, has direct effects with microaggressions and macro assaults to the basis of our hair. But that is like, if I could just lay it out to you right there, that's exactly one of the ways in which you can see that happening and manifesting.
But see, this is part of why it's so important for Black women to go into spaces and speak on their experience, because you just gave me such a deep understanding. You just connected a dot on this big puzzle. Like I've been, you know what I mean? Like with this the image and the hair and the Black women and the macro assaults. That was ridiculously enlightening. Actually, it's hard to think about certain perspectives like that when I have to go through my own life and have to experience all of my own things as well. So that was amazing, and I really like how you connected all of that. That was amazing. Oh shit. That's going on the show. That's going. Aeyanna, bro, you just cooked, bro. Wait a minute, bro. You just fucking cooked.
Look,
You
I
just
say I
cooked,
might
bro.
be long winded, but let me put the whole meal together. It's gonna be 4 course, fully gourmet. You gonna get it and understand it's gonna feed you.
Bro, fed the fuck. Bro, I'm full, bro. Look, we. When you started with the Christopher Columbus, I didn't know where you was gonna go, and at one point I was gonna be like, okay, can we get back to the microaggression part and how it affects us, and how we, act in white society? But then you did it. That was damn, bro. Okay, moving on.